prices, and therefore, the Italian government is
bent.
Well, it's wrestling with a huge sort of deficit, isn't it? The Italian
by which we mean
finances
inefficient, I should point out. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast.
Please do.
That noise is Jamie dicking about with the microphone, but you expect no more of him by this stage. I'm joined, of course, by Jamie, otherwise known as Dicks About with Microphone. And I'm also joined, as often am, by Iain, who is just well behaved and nice. So thank you, Iain.
No problem.
This week we're going to be starting off by talking about some China intrigue that's been going on this week. We're going to go on to 5G and specifically what constitutes real 5G, and then we're going to conclude with some chat about some of the stuff going on in California, especially them arguing the toss over net neutrality. Just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on Facebook, you can listen to it on iTunes or on SoundCloud, and if you listen to it, you can watch it on the site or on Facebook. Cool. Okay, so this China thing. So we're chatting about it quite a lot of times on the pod, principally in the context of sort of Donald Trump apparently looking for a trade war fight with China, accusing them of, in a geopolitical, economic way, acting in a way that's hostile to the interests of the US, and obviously that feeds into his protectionist, sort of populist political agenda. And then a lot of times we've just been, and then Huawei has obviously got a lot of grief. It's not allowed to do a lot of stuff in the US. It's now not allowed to do 5G stuff in Australia. And there have been rumours about that possibly spreading elsewhere, although I wrote a piece a while ago about Canada and New Zealand saying, no, they're all right, they're going to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Well, they do at the moment anyway, don't they, I guess? It's sort of status quo.
Yeah, but you get the impression that some countries, like maybe Australia, which, as I think we've spoken about before, has a lot of interest in keeping China sweet, has maybe been lent on by the US.
Yeah,
I mean, they'd probably contest that, and they'd say we did our own research and we come to our own conclusions. But it's.
The UK's also raised concerns, hasn't it, very recently?
And I can't imagine that Trump's administration isn't going around diplomatically going, "What are you going to do about this dodgy stuff?" Because they've decided that Huawei's dodgy. I stress that Telecoms.com does not adopt a position one way or the other, as we're not in possession of exhaustive evidence on the subject. But talking about evidence, this week has led to an interesting twist whereby there was a story in Bloomberg. They got a scoop that apparently some tech coming out of China contains a tiny little chip, an otherwise ignored chip, that, to the best of my knowledge, and I will hand over to Jamie in a sec because he's the one who wrote it up, to the best of my knowledge, allows a sort of backdoor for the Chinese state to sort of hack into sort of Western technology infrastructure. So, Jamie, why don't you expand on that and tell us what's going on?
Well, it's to do with a little microchip, a very, very small microchip, which is supposedly smaller than a grain of rice,
right,
which has been implanted onto motherboards from Supermicro, which basically provides servers, or that component of a server,
right,
to 900 companies around the world. The big issue is that they've seemingly infiltrated the supply chain to do with a company called Elemental.
Right.
So Elemental is a business which is owned by AWS or Amazon. And it does video compression software.
Okay.
So early on when it was developed, it got a lot of interest of various different, not only sort of like sports, and it got the interest of AWS just before it started to scale up its Amazon Prime business. But it's also got a lot of contracts with government agencies, which transmit a lot of data, a lot of video. So, for instance, a couple of the examples was the Navy. So if you've got the servers that they have on naval warships, when they're transmitting data back and forth, it needs to be compressed before it can be sent on. And also drones for the CIA. All the images are being compressed before they're sent back to back to Langley, back to the headquarters.
Yeah, and you can see the potential scope for this. They're cutting people like Huawei and ZTE out of public telecoms infrastructure because they're worried about that stuff. But if that same kind of vulnerability is being put into all servers, then that affects everything, or at least all servers that contain Supermicro gear.
Yeah, I think you're jumping ahead a little bit of the storyline there.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
But I think so. Yeah, I mean, just to explain the full story, it was, as AWS were trying to acquire Elemental, the rumor has it, and according to Bloomberg, they sent off a load of servers, or Elemental sent off a load of servers up to a third-party security specialist in Canada, which uncovered this micro device, which can be traced back all the way through the supply chain through to the motherboards, which were supplied by Supermicro.
Right.
But then, because their plants were overworked in Taiwan and Shanghai, they subcontracted to another Chinese company whose name I can't remember,
Right.
who were apparently responsible for putting these microchips
Oh, I see. So that's where
onto the motherboards.
the focus
So
of
you need like
suspicion
a
is.
specialist to actually flag that something is not kosher.
This is
hard to spot, aren't they? I think that was.
it's
the thing.
incredibly hard to
They were
spot.
really hard to spot that they were there.
Yeah.
But
as James
could
says,
just
only
be a
when they
little
sent it
transistor
off
or
for-
something.
for sort of for a checkup that this came
Seems
came up.
and then you couldn't check thousands.
And they're obviously designed not to be spotted. Yeah,
Yeah,
They
I
were
know,
put in
yeah.
pretty surreptitiously
I mean, this is
by
where-
the
That's
Chinese
terrifying.
military. Apparently,
This is where it becomes incredibly complicated, because to insert this chip effectively, you would have to have a knowledge of the current product, what the future product roadmap is. You'd have to be able to map out Supermicro's and Elemental's logistics and supply chain to make sure it's actually going to the right customer.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you sent it, I mean, they might be trying to spy on the CIA, but it's no good if you've got a chip on, a microchip on a motherboard which ends up in a university supercomputer. There's absolutely no point in that.
Could just be speculative, I guess. Just let's assume, and I know that there's the companies involved have issued sort of denials, and I'll ask you about that in a sec. But let's assume that we take the story completely at its face value, and that is what happened. And the Chinese military got involved at this sort of vulnerable part of the supply chain and stuck these chips in. But as you say, they can't possibly target it. Can't know it. So maybe it would just be speculative. Maybe it's like sleeper cells.
No,
if we just get this
it couldn't
capability
be
in as much
speculative.
stuff.
Supermicro specialise in customized.
Right.
In customized motherboards,
Okay.
which are designed specifically for the purpose. So something that's ordered by the CIA
Yeah.
would be different because it's a different use case than the
It's
one.
not just some standard PC motherboard.
What if it's
or
just
whatever.
like a scattered
So-
gun strategy? Like,
Well, that was
see
what I was. That's what I
Yeah.
was saying. But Jamie's point is, because these things are bespoke, it's not possible to have a scattergun.
they knew where
Yes.
they were going.
They need to
basically.
know where
Yeah.
these things are going, otherwise there's
They
no point
know
doing
that they're
it.
going to.
I mean, they're taking immense risk.
warships.
All
or
you
whatever.
need is one thing to be found out.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the worst case scenario, you don't want it sent off to a university, because probably at some point you're going to have some sort of engineering student who's really intrigued by supercomputers, who takes it to bits and has a look at the inside so he get for his own
Oh, what's
purpose.
this?
Just
Yeah.
hold on a minute.
So,
Yeah.
so they can probably
like the
go,
plot
"Oh,
of a great
what's
movie."
This is quite strange. But yeah, so it's an immensely complicated campaign. I mean, assuming that it is true, of course.
It's
but-
pretty well sourced, though, the story. I think it's 17
Yeah,
sources.
Bloomberg wouldn't splash with
and,
this unless it felt there was some.
people
substance to it.
within the companies that have issued denials, some of the sources are from those companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty high-ranking people as well.
So let's
apparently.
square that off.
So-
Actually, Jamie, you just wrote it today about the denial. So Amazon, Supermicro, Apple, for some reason.
Because they were supposedly infiltrated.
Okay, and the Chinese government have
So
all just called
Apple
bullshit.
supposedly bought, following these chips being placed on the motherboards, Apple supposedly bought 30,000 of these motherboards to fuel its data center expansion, both in China and the various data centers in North America. So that's why they're getting involved. So they were named as one of the 30 companies that apparently was involved in the crossfire.
And what did you think of, when you were writing up earlier on, what did you think of their rebuttals? Did they seem pretty strong?
Yeah. I mean, they turned around and said, flat out denials.
Right.
I mean, and I don't know. I mean, the Bloomberg is generally pretty good with its sources, but you can't with such a strong denial, not just from one company but across the board. I mean, I know they've all got corporate reputations to protect. I mean, are they lying? I mean, it's either someone is lying.
What are they denying exactly? That they knew anything about it?
That they knew anything about it, or that they found anything
dodgy,
malicious on any of their hardware.
So it would seem like if someone can present a motherboard with this chip on it, and then someone can look at that chip and say it's a moody chip.
But can't both be true? That the story's true,
they can't,
and that they didn't know about it.
They completely contradict with each other. Because Apple...
Right.
So the story is that Apple found these discrepancies because there was some error in the code or some error in the sort of performance.
So this is when you're saying it was sent off and they looked into it, but then they covered it up, is what the story's saying, sort of thing.
The story is saying that Apple found the discrepancy through this third party who had a look at... Amazon found the discrepancy prior to, during the due diligence process, while evaluating Elemental.
Right.
And then they sent it off to these security specialists who reported back, which this information was then relayed onto the government. And that's when the investigation starts. AWS, Microscope, who have reportedly found a load of these microchips as well, and apparently Apple have found a load of these microchips in their operations in China, which is one of the reasons they transferred everything across to Cinet, I think was its local partner. And all three of them have turned around and said, we've got no idea what this report is talking about.
Right.
We've never found any malicious microchips, and we have no knowledge, nor have we cooperated with any official intelligence investigation. So they're just literally flat out denying it. They're calling this a complete fabrication from Bloomberg.
Right.
Which is a bizarre claim. I mean, so this is the interesting thing, and there's a lot of this flying around at the moment, not necessarily just in politics, but where you've got two contradictory accounts.
Yeah.
And it's hard to conclusively find in favour of one or the other. So one thing I just want to say quickly is when the story first broke, I thought, well, this is rather convenient for Trump and his agenda.
Yeah.
For them to have suddenly dug up all this dodgy stuff that's been put there by a Chinese state. But then when all these rebuttals came along, I sort of thought, well, of course they're going to say that. Of course they're going to say this is all bullshit.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one. Sorry, what were you going to say?
It could cripple their
I'm
business.
just thinking that, they want to rebut it because they're worried about the reputational damage.
No, not just reputational. I mean, financial. I mean, if you look at you look at the number of government contracts that AWS has.
Yeah.
If there's any malicious microchips on their hardware, all of a sudden those contracts are just torn up. What's it called? Supermicro. They've got 900 customers around the world, all of which have not only sensitive information if they're governments, but they'll have trade secrets if they're private corporations, so they'll rip those contracts up. And then finally, you look at someone like Apple. Apple also has a huge amount of government contracts and corporate contracts.
So they've got a pretty big, vested interest in denying it, basically.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Just as whoever leaked this stuff to Bloomberg, let's assume it's someone within the Republican Party, within the Trump administration, has got a big interest, interest in the American and the global public seeing Chinese in a
I'm sure they have, and if
negative light.
If that's the original source, then you could maybe go, well, this is a bit dodgy, perhaps. But it's 17. I mean, you get the sort of Bernstein and Woodward. We're getting 2 or 3 sources, I think, when they were writing about the whole Nixon thing. This is 17 sources, including.
It's a lot of deep throats.
It's a lot of people. It just. And it's not it's not like it's come from Breitbart or some website that's a little bit dodgy, maybe reputationally. You go, well, I'm not. It's Bloomberg. It's pretty.
I've no doubt Bloomberg thinks it's legit, and I've no doubt that Apple, Amazon, and Supermicro think it's.
Well,
bullshit.
what are they doing? Are they suing Bloomberg?
Don't think so.
Don't know. This is early days. Don't forget.
It's very dangerous territory to start suing media. He said in a slightly panicked voice.
I mean, don't forget this came about yesterday.
Yeah.
So I imagine if there are going to be any lawsuits, they'll probably come out later on this evening, maybe early next week. I mean, like Scott said, it's incredibly difficult to sue.
I think America they have more press protection.
The other
in the
thing
States
is
than we have
that
here as well.
Bloomberg had, unless I'm mistaken, the denials were incorporated in the story. Yeah.
Yes.
The letters are actually included in a link
in the
story.
first.
Yeah, the very first story. I remember looking because I read the first few paragraphs, and pretty high up as well. There's a link to documents from Apple and various others denying it. So they obviously knew that was that had already happened, and they still went ahead and published. You know,
and the thing
John
is,
Mickleswaite, whoever edits it now, must have been pretty bloody certain that this is.
Well, and the thing is about suing the media, if you have to be able to prove sort of bad faith and malice.
Yeah.
If certainly in the States where I think there are more protections than the UK, if you can stand up and go, we thought this is in the public interest, we believe this stuff to be true, we're reporting some stuff in good faith, then that's just you doing your job.
Yeah.
You can't sue journalists for disseminating awkward facts. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
It just gets dodgy.
As long as they're facts.
Well, as long as they're facts, or as long as the publication can reasonably say they believe them to be facts at the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's a whole area, sort of libel law and that sort of thing. But I think they're more, believe it or not, they're more into freedom of speech in the States than we are in the UK. Not that that's saying much, as we're getting pretty Orwellian these days.
I mean, I don't know where I sit on it, to be perfectly honest. You know, I wouldn't put it past this being a massive. I'm not questioning the credibility of Bloomberg at all. You know, 99.99% of the stories you read in Bloomberg, and especially when the sources involved, turn out to be true.
Well, when it's something that's gone to this much, I mean, it's a huge amount of work. This has obviously been something they've been cooking for months.
This is months' work.
It's a very kind of polished piece of work. It's not like something they've stuck up after a press conference with,
And if it turns out to be total bull, then that's a major reputational hit to Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Was it longer than 900 words?
It was
about 10,000 or something.
Thousands. It was ridiculous. It's honestly, the whole thing takes about 20-25 minutes to read. It's ridiculous. The amount of detail they've gone into is incredible. But yeah, so I don't know where I mean, you know, China could be crippling for their economy. Ultimately, you know,
really? That severe?
Well, China's the workshop of the world, isn't it? You know, you
think if people start calling into question Shenzhen in general and that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, if you look at the fact that 90% of PCs and 75% of smartphones are manufactured in China. Now, if, for instance, these components, and we're not talking, and then that's not taken into account other components as well. You know, when you look at communications networks or
there's no doubt it's the manufacturing centre of the world.
So anything that touches critical communications, you know, if this turns out to be true, you know, is Supermicro going to carry on manufacturing their stuff in Taiwan and China? Probably not.
Well, Taiwan in principle should be free of any dicking about from China, even if it's happening, as Taiwan is separate.
Yeah.
Although not that the Chinese like you saying that. You know. That's me. I'm not allowed back into China now just by saying that.
But then So I mean, but there's plenty of other places around the world where they can go for cheap labour, cheap real estate, and cheap energy costs. You know, they could move their manufacturing hubs elsewhere.
Well, it is, and so that makes you wonder. Back to the original premise about how the story broke: is how much of this is influenced by the broader geopolitical agenda coming from the Trump administration, which is to say, China's naughty, we've got to put them in their place, and whatever else comes from his crazy ass Twitter account. But that doesn't mean that I read an interesting thing, I think, in the Spectator about Trump's approach to trade wars, and most people who are at all into sort of free market economics think trade wars and tariffs and mercantilism are very bad things, because wealth is actually the flow of money, not the accumulation of money, and there's also everyone tends to lose out. But this piece I read was making the point that, well, if someone else is already taking a piss and you just continue to just let them, then arguably that's even worse.
Yeah, but I mean, what they've done is they've sort of used. I mean, these security issues, they predate Trump, The reason that Huawei and ZTE have been locked out of the
reputation for IP theft and that sort of thing as well.
Well, that's a different thing, though, isn't it?
This investigation dates into the Obama era as well.
Okay,
I mean, it gives them an excuse to pursue a sort of protectionist agenda. It's something else they can put in the kind of why shouldn't we, You know, they can, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong, does it?
No.
And actually, I can see China. You know, it's not a democratic place. It monitors its own citizens. It's, you know,
they have elections. They just tend to be rather predictable in their outcome.
It's not a surprise that China would be trying to spy on the West and using technology to do it. And I'm not saying that the other governments don't do that, by the way.
Well, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, I generally, I'm the same mindset as you. Yeah, I generally believe Bloomberg, and I believe this is happening. The only thing is that it's so, like you said, it's so convenient to support the Republican anti-China euphoria that I'm still going to reserve that 10% in my mind that it is.
Rightly so.
You know, I'm going to side with the technology companies. But I think it is incredibly compelling evidence, and Bloomberg has got an incredible reputation for doing these things.
The Wall Street Journal,
it's not an outrageous thing it's not really that outrageous that China would try to do it.
It's not that much of a stretch of the imagination.
It's not a stretch of the
imagination. We're talking about
the Chinese probably have the same story about the West.
Well, maybe they do, and I'm sure that the CIA's been up to some dodgy things in its time.
I dare say they probably have been doing it as well.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
the Chinese Bloomberg is reporting the same thing.
Scandal, of course, they've been doing it.
I think we can accept that everyone dicks about with each other. Then, as with most things, it becomes a matter of degree. You're talking about other countries. You know, this is a sort of borderline tech thing as well.
Getting into Russia,
which is Russia, and everyone knows we've had all this stuff going on. You know, weird ass nerve agents cropping up in Salisbury and all that sort of thing. But now we've got this big thing that's multinational. It's broken in Holland. It's broken in the UK. It's broken in the US about them hacking into some sort of drug testing or drug monitoring organisation for apparently mischievous purposes. And it does seem to be this sort of compulsive under Putin.
Using public Wi-Fi as well.
Was it?
Yeah, they stole Wi-Fi passwords, and then they used an antenna in the boot of the car and these Wi-Fi logins to hack into the system.
Well, I'm sure we don't make it too difficult enough for them to hack in, but there's just this compulsive mischievousness that seems to come from Putin's Russia to just dick about with stuff or poison people they don't like when they live in England or whatever.
Yeah. I think they want to sort of sow discord, don't they? And kind of that's Russia's main intention, isn't it? Really, it's just sort of mess things up, divide and conquer. Exactly. Whereas I think with China, it's more a case of sort of economic control. And,
I agree. I think their motives are different, and China's obviously a lot richer and more powerful.
Kind of more sinister in a way from Russia because it's sort of very destructive.
Nihilistic.
It's nihilistic, whereas
unpleasant.
China sort of wants to be the daddy of us all.
They're basically just indulging in dubious business practices, which, let's face it, most companies probably do. Not that I'll name any for the aforementioned.
You don't want to do that.
For the aforementioned, not very supportive UK libel laws, but. So there is a bit of that dicking about, and I don't think it's hard for people to sort of conflate Russia and China and the East in general as being antagonistic to the West, a la Cold War. It's like a new Cold War, but on sort of technological and economic grounds rather than military grounds. And we don't have old-fashioned espionage. We don't have John le Carré stuff going on. To the best of my knowledge, it's all cyber. Which is all a bit disappointing, but I suppose the world's always been like this. Everyone's always just wanting to mess about with each other, haven't they? We can't just relax.
Still got our Jason Bournes, I'm sure.
Yeah, why can't everyone just sort of be like Elon Musk on Joe Rogan and just fire up a great big joint and just chill out?
Say it's all about love.
But then that didn't go so well for Musk, did it? So maybe I've answered my own question there. So, I mean, and there was one other thing before we sort of move on to that, although this gives us a bit of a sort of segue into some other stuff. Hey, Jamie, you wrote this. You've had a hot week. You wrote this about Huawei. Basically wrote a letter to the US going, this is why you're talking bollocks. Why don't you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was just basically a letter to the FCC saying we shouldn't be excluded from 5G, long and short of it. And they just went round. I mean, one of the points which they did make, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and it's kind of contradictory to what's going on considering this Chinese story, is they shouldn't be exclusively focused on one country or one company. Like, if you focus all of your attention on one country, you leave yourself exposed to the rest of the world, and threats can happen wherever. It's the globalization trend has made an international supply chain, and you can have some idiot in Denmark who's I don't know, applying to be part of a gang through the dark web, and the initiation right is to hack and take down this website, or it could be someone who's pissed off with the Trump campaign, or you have idiots and nefarious individuals all over the world. So if you focus too much on one country, you leave yourself exposed elsewhere.
Okay,
and that was
one approach.
Yeah, I mean this was a point which was raised. Is you shouldn't ban Huawei. You should focus on creating. You shouldn't ban Huawei because China is dodgy. You should focus on creating a security framework which prevents anyone from from the wider world causing problems so in the US.
Get your own house in order, stop scapegoating us.
Yes, essentially. And another thing they did point out is they said, why the hell haven't you banned Nokia as well? They said Nokia has got a joint venture in China, and the company that they're partnered with is, I think, part state-owned, and the organisation which completely oversees the joint venture is state-owned as well. So he said the state has got complete visibility into this JV. Yeah. So if you're so worried about state intervention, why aren't you having a look in at Nokia?
It's a good argument in a way, because it's interesting that Ericsson recently started opening facilities in the US, didn't it?
Right.
They've pumped a huge amount of funding into opening up facilities in the US market, so
and
they
got a mate in
build closer to their customers.
It's an interesting point. If anyone who does, it's like Google's had this thing where some people internally were getting the arsehole because they're apparently making a version of Google for China that could be censored and all that sort of thing. And of course, all the sort of idealists within Google are all like, "Oh, I thought we were supposed to be nice," and so they're not into that. But it begs the question: is any Western company that does business in China, are they having to make some concessions to the Chinese state in terms of allowing them access to certain stuff they wouldn't allow other states?
That's one of the arguments in the past, isn't it?
Yeah.
They've had to hand over. This is why this is one of the criticisms the Trump administration comes up with, isn't it? They've had to hand over intellectual property in the past,
so and then that's been
doing
used
business by Chinese companies, by way of the Chinese government and regulators to sort of develop copycat technology.
So back to that Nokia question, is the US going to start putting more and more pressure on any? Is the US government going to start putting more and more pressure on any of its own companies?
Maybe this Ericsson move to open facilities in the US had something to do, because they've also used China as a hub in the past to do certain things. So
right. Well, there can be no doubt that Ericsson, as well as Nokia, will be benefiting massively from the fact that Huawei's frozen out of the US
this
market.
is the thing, though. I think Huawei also said in that. I think Ray wrote it up for us, but I can't remember the details of it. But I think they were also saying that it's not good for the smaller operators in the US market, because it's not good for any operator really, because if you've only got Nokia and Ericsson as your sort of radio suppliers, and you've shut out the other two big guys, you've got pretty unfavourable pricing, obviously. I mean, those guys love it, Nokia and Ericsson, and we keep going on about this sort of Ericsson recovery and how great things are at the moment for it, even though it's not that great. It's just sort of back into profits barely. But how much of this is to do with the fact that 5G's all of a sudden started to pick up? They've got a few contracts now, and there's no competition for them in that market. If Huawei and ZTE were in, there's Nokia
and Samsung a bit.
They just split it up between them.
But then you're quite often getting a lot of these deals we were writing about were like people were going with Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung as a sort of trio, weren't they, for a lot of 5G gear?
Yeah.
In the US.
Yeah, I suppose. But you've got such a smaller pool without Huawei and ZTE who've been sort of putting a lot of price pressure on those companies 100%. Out in other parts of the world as well.
Well, they reckon in the letter, they said they 20 to 30% more expensive than European markets because of the absence of ZTE and Huawei.
Right.
That was Huawei's point.
That was Huawei's point.
That's an interesting data figure.
They also turned around and said they got support of, I think, something like 10 rural telcos which are plugging the holes that the big boys.
Because some rural ones have used them, haven't they, in the past? They do get used by some of the rural guys.
Well, their point is that Nokia and Ericsson don't give them enough attention, and in years gone by, they were overcharging for the smaller components, for the smaller scale, the smaller orders, and they weren't giving them enough attention. They were, favouring Verizon or AT&T, but they turned around and said Huawei came in and they fixed our jobs. They didn't worry about price until the end. The Ericsson and Nokia were doing crap jobs in some of our projects, and they said that is critical for us to continue operating.
We've heard that as well at live reading conferences, the executive summit that happens in December. There's always a couple of sort of rural US carriers who come over to that event and who've used Huawei, and they've said the level of service they've had is fantastic, and they wouldn't have been able to do things without Huawei. So
no, I think we've all written editorials saying that on the whole, notwithstanding any of these allegations that get chucked at it, for when we speak to people just like on the show floor at Mobile Congress or whatever, they're just saying, look man, they just deliver more for less.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one. Okay, we've been talking about that quite a while. I'm going to move it on a little bit. In the US and increasingly in other parts of the world, we're getting people starting to announce real 5G. So I think it was Verizon or AT&T or both announcing the first 5G in the US. Lots of people are going for first 5G.
I think it's just Verizon.
Just
Verizon. Sorry,
it's just Verizon.
And so there's prestige from saying first 5G, and there's some marketing that you can build on the back of that. And I guess I want to ask a question about what you have to have actually delivered to plausibly claim we're the first to 5G in this area.
Yeah.
So is it the first trials? Is it the first live trials? Is it the first viable commercial kit? For me, it's the first sort of 5G that can actually be used by a normal punter. But even within that, we've got Verizon, it's all about fixed wireless access, isn't it?
No, just for the moment.
Just for the moment,
just for the moment.
But if they're claiming a first on the back of fixed wireless access as opposed to stuff that I can use with my phone,
it's not,
so I want to put it to you guys. What do you think?
It's not even a standardised version.
Right.
I mean,
so
we were talking about this in the run-up.
So I'm going to put my cards on the table.
Well, I think it's got to be based on the actual standard, hasn't it? Otherwise, it's not really.
Isn't 5G just increased data rates?
It is.
Yeah.
So but then you could call 4.9G 5G, couldn't you?
Well, yeah, but then you've just got to decide when the crossover is. I think more than anything else.
But I bet you'll get 4G networks that'll work quicker than some 5G networks, depending on which area you're in.
Yeah, but
it's all to do with different.
But that's all just down to the congestion on the network, though, isn't it?
But it's still this experience is still better on an advanced LTE network, let's say, and maybe they've got maybe in years to come they've got their core, and they've done a lot of the other overhaul that gets associated with 5G, but the radio connection that someone's on in Cornwall is still an advanced 4G one, and they're probably getting a better one perhaps than someone in a busy area of London on 5G. Then I think it's got to be because the equipment industry builds to standards, and that's what drives economies of scale.
I agree with you there. But I mean, then the problem is that it's not 5G because firstly, it's not.
Verizon's one.
It's not the standard, the release 16 or whatever it is. But then even that release isn't standalone 5G. So there's an argument
it's non-standalone,
that it's
it's still recognised by the 3GPP as that the non-standalone is the first
is
5G. Whereas what Verizon's using is its own. I think it's called 5G TF.
Yeah,
as you say, they'd say they can software upgrade to the standard. So it's not like a huge leap or anything if we're to believe Verizon, but it's still a bit.
It could just be me being an excessively jaded journalist, but there just seems this rush to be first, and this has happened in previous generations
as well.
Well, it's a bit irrelevant, and I think we can agree on that. But it's not irrelevant if you're in the marketing department of an operator.
Yeah.
At least they don't perceive it as irrelevant, I suspect.
They wouldn't. Yeah, it's not. It's not irrelevant to marketers.
Quite. So, but the rush to be able to claim 5G first inevitably leads to people. These are the definition of what is 5G slipping.
Well, why do the marketers care about it? I suppose they care about it because they think that people care. Because if people don't care, then there's no point in claiming that you're 5G first.
Yeah,
it's a prestige thing at the same time as well, isn't it? So because only one person can be the first.
Yeah.
And ultimately,
so you put that in your quarterlies and stuff.
But the thing is, like marketing connectivity isn't that great. Because what do you say? Oh, we've got X amount of speed. Well, so is everyone else. So you market on coverage, but then you can also market on. I mean, these guys in the telco department must be telecom marketing departments get quite bored because they haven't got anything new to say. Yeah. So at least first to 5G is a new source.
Well, also they know that's what they know to market, isn't it? They're not very good at marketing anything else.
No,
telcos.
No.
They're good at marketing speeds. I mean, you
numerical
see
stuff.
Cable operators
they haven't
in
got
London.
Anything else really to market?
No, they haven't.
Have they?
But tech can be very like that. Tech can be very numerical. You go into Curry's to look for a Hoover, and they go, "Oh, this one's this many sort of megawatts."
And the cable companies do this, don't they?
Even in those areas, you look at sort of like they've created brands.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that John Legere has been very good at. He's created this sort of T-Mobile Magenta Army brand. Yeah. But then, using the Hoover example, you've got, recognisable brands. Like everyone would buy a Henry the Hoover, not because it's the best Hoover around, because it's got a solid, or everyone buys
a face on it. What more could you ask for?
Or everyone buys Dyson because James Dyson or whatever his name is recognised as one of the best scientists in the UK. And it's the brand.
He shows you clever little.
But the operators aren't at that point, are they? Really? I mean, you don't go and get an EE connection because you think they're necessarily better than Vodafone.
No, there's never going to be an operator equivalent of Apple where everyone agrees it's better than everything else.
Yeah, but
it's the connectivity thing that I think a lot of people buy for in this country, but the operators aren't clever enough to do hyper-localised marketing where they say, right, because you are living in this area. Like, for instance, if they looked at my Facebook or if they looked at my data or my usage data, they could probably turn around and say, right, okay, Jamie, you spend X amount of time, 4 to 5 trips a year, you go back to Wales, and then you spend the rest of the time in London. Like Vodafone could look at me and say my hometown, the best coverage there is Vodafone, and they've got pretty good coverage. Everyone's got pretty good coverage in London, realistically. Let's be honest. So Vodafone could turn around and say, because of these two things, we think you should buy off us, and that would be hyper localized marketing. But they don't do that.
We're based in Wales as well.
That's intelligent marketing.
Well, quite. So there's this very crude numerical. I think they figure that everyone else can understand that 5 is better than 4.
Well, I suspect they're right to some extent. I mean, you do get people who go out and when Apple brings out a new, not looking at anyone in particular here, but when they bring out a new device that costs a fortune,
what kind
doesn't do anything new
on a new phone,
they go and buy it because they like to have the latest iPhone device. And it's the same with 5G and 4G. You'll get people who want to go out because they want to have, I've got 5G and I'm better than you.
And that happens because they haven't bought a phone in 4 years.
And that happens on a corporate level as well. There's a degree of corporate chest beating to being first, I presume.
Yeah, even though actually
in practice
you're not going to notice a lot of difference probably. I mean, maybe maybe they will, I don't know.
It's all dependent on the I think first of all, because you can deliver data so much cheaper, it's probably going to work out to cheaper tariffs in the long run.
I don't think they're going to offer 5G at a lower price.
No,
to customers.
But eventually, it's not. It's not. What I mean is because their costs aren't escalating.
Yeah, they want to be more efficient. And
yes, so that'll be a benefit in the long run because there won't be the same huge inflation as if we were staying on 4G, but they were trying to deliver the same experience. But then at the same time, the applications of tomorrow are going to demand so much more than 4G is capable of.
Yeah.
We're talking about sort of data rates and data usage at the moment, like it's going to stay exactly the same over the next 10 years. If you compare the amount of data that we use today compared to what it was 10 years ago, and if you take, it's going to double every year or 2 years or whatever it is. Imagine the data use that we're going to be on our phones in 5-10 years time. That's when it's VR or we're more walking around, more video. That's for me what it's going to be more.
Need it. They need to have it to prop up their networks basically and cope with this tsunami of traffic that's coming.
100%.
Which might explain, to sort of force a segue on the conversation, why they're shelling out so much money in Italy for this stuff. So I basically used you to do my heavy lifting for the story about the Italian auction, because I know you've been keeping a spreadsheet where you quite rightly keep track of what in auctions is getting paid per megahertz for a given band.
Yeah.
And that's obviously by far the best way of comparing what people are prepared to pay. And there's a really surprising variation. So we just had the Finnish one last week where they didn't pay that much.
I know the figures if you want.
Off the top of your head. You're such a geek.
So Finland was 0.0, so it's 0.04 dollars.
So 4 cents
per megahertz per head of population.
Yeah. Per megahertz per head of population.
Yeah.
Oh God, I didn't put that when I ripped your figures off.
Oh, you can easily
I
change
just put
it.
per megahertz.
That's per megahertz per head of population.
Right.
So it takes into account the different size
no
between
one
the
called
countries.
Me out on it. Yeah, of course, that's
and
right.
Then,
I'm just remembering that I failed.
And then
to
Italy,
make
it was in the mid. This is the mid band, by the way. This is the 3.4 to 3.8.
Yeah.
That was Finland's price, and in Italy it was 41 cents.
Yeah.
41 cents,
per
dollar
megahertz
cents
per capita.
megahertz per capita. So it's 10 times the difference. And
and we were chatting about it before, but when I was writing my story, but then you went and wrote a more comprehensive analysis. But the general take I got from our chat was that it's just a supply and demand thing, and that seemed to be perhaps borne out. Vodafone had a little whinge, didn't it?
Yeah.
What are the reasons?
Well, I think it was structured in an odd way that, I mean, for a start, you don't. Yeah, so the supply and demand thing, there was quite a lot of spectrum made available in Finland.
Yeah.
Now, countries don't always have the spectrum to make available.
Almost three times as much per
maybe,
operator.
I don't know the situation with Italy, with surrounding spectrum. Maybe it's not something
maybe
they could easily free up. But what they had was 200, whereas Finland had about twice that much.
Yeah, 2 to 3 times.
And that
they got 130 megahertz each, whereas
exactly that's 3 operators splitting that up, whereas the Italian operators, there were 4 of them competing for this much smaller amount, and they carved it up in a very odd way.
But didn't they reserve a lot because Iliad's was a
that
new
was
entry?
In the 700 megahertz band.
Yeah. Oh, right.
So in the mid band, which is the one, I mean, the 700 megahertz band wasn't really a shock because that stuff always goes for a lot of money anyway.
And it got about what was expected.
It got about what was expected, but the pricing in the mid band just went up astronomically over the course of this 2 weeks.
They had about 13 days of auctions, didn't they?
Yeah, and one reason was that they had 2 80 megahertz licenses and 2 20 megahertz licenses, so they're basically creating 2 winners and 2 losers. In the auction process, because if you talk to analysts,
20 megahertz of mid-band.
20 megahertz isn't really much. It's not really enough to do the stuff that you need to be able to. I mean, going back to what Jamie was saying about advanced 5G applications, you're going to struggle to do something.
So should they have just offered up 50 each?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I don't understand is why it was structured that way. I mean, I suppose a cynic might say maybe they realised that structuring it that way was going to drive up prices, and therefore, the Italian government is
bent.
Well, it's wrestling with a huge sort of deficit, isn't it? The Italian
by
finances,
which we mean inefficient, I should point out.
There's a massive piece in The Economist today actually about how bad the Italian financial situation is at the moment.
Yeah.
And so an opportunity to raise anything for the public sector is
so they're laughing
is something that they're going to grab hold of potentially.
And I'm sure they'll spend it all on really worthwhile stuff.
It was so much more than anyone was expecting. I mean, they thought they themselves said they budgeted to raise about 2.5 billion
and they
euros,
got 6.5.
and they got 6.5 from
so that's four bill
and
that they can spend on party.
So, but I don't know what I mean, if you'd have to sort of sit down, I guess, with someone from the economic ministry and say, why was it done this way to have 2 80 megahertz and 2? And I've not seen anybody provide any analysis of why it was done that way. All I've seen is that this is one of the reasons why the price.
I got one statty question before I move on to the third topic because we're running out of time. Do you know per megahertz whether a lot more was paid per megahertz for the 80 block than the 20 block, or whether it was quite similar?
I think it was similar.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because you'd think there'd be a per megahertz drop off in the 20 because that thickness of pipe is less useful.
Yeah, although I don't know if it was done. I don't know with the bidding. I don't know if it was a case of, winner takes. They're not. I don't know if they were bidding actually for the 80 megahertz. They were all in competition with each other, and then at the end of the day, the guys that bid the most got the 80 megahertz license. I don't know the mechanics of the.
There can be some really arcane mechanics.
I don't know the mechanics of the process.
It's like when we had that Comcast thing with a blind auction. There's all kinds of weird things you can do with auctions. Anyway,
I mean, they obviously paid less because it was less, but on a per megahertz basis. Exactly. I think that the amounts were similar, but I'd have to have another look at
which is a bit counterintuitive, given that the 80 block
is so much more useful.
It's more useful because of its size. Anyway,
but it's left. The other interesting thing about it is it's left one of the companies there. I mean, Iliad as well.
Oh, that's it. You wrote about Windtray.
Windtray's in a very difficult situation, I think, now. I mean, it was already in a difficult situation before the 5G auction started because it had been hit pretty hard by the entry of Iliad, more than the other 2 companies, partly because it's tariffs, it's sort of the lower cost operator, and that's the market that Iliad's really going for.
Yeah, so they're like because its tray is 3.
Yeah.
So if we think of them as equivalent to 3 in the UK, but then now they've got a new 3 coming up and attacking them from the budget direction.
And they were already forecast from Moody's, I think, saying that they were sort of looking at a really bad year, and they had a really bad second quarter.
Right.
They've also their other problem is that they also used ZTE very heavily,
right?
And they've blamed ZTE basically for delays to their network rollout, and they've even blamed ZTE for losing customers.
So that's a bit of a perfect storm of bad
didn't
stuff.
Blame Iliad because they were the ones who sold assets to Iliad in the first place to allow Iliad to get into the market.
I see.
Which they were forced to do. I don't know if they weren't forced to sell to Iliad, but they were forced to sell assets to another company to preserve it as a full-play market. And
and move that along because we're running out of time and we've got to talk about a third topic. We'll do it quite quickly. There's been, Jamie, you've been writing about California going against what the FCC has mandated regarding supposed net neutrality, and then there's been some sort of comeback to them. So why don't you quickly summarise that for us?
So essentially this is more on the legal side than it is actually anything to do with the technology. So essentially in Pi got rid of net neutrality, Washington State put it in place, and then California followed suit and reinstated the rules last week. I think it was signed into law last Friday by the governor. DOJ immediately sued them, and then earlier this week a coalition of various different associations representing the telcos followed up with another lawsuit saying California has essentially contradicted 4 things. I think it was first of all the Restoring Internet Freedom Act, that pompously named Pi initiative to get rid of net neutrality, so it's violated
Make
that.
internet great again.
Then it's also violated the Communications Act, which is the bedrock of the essentially all regulation in the US industry. And finally, it has violated 2 clauses in the American Constitution. So should the net neutrality laws allowed to stand, it undermines one of the clauses in the Communications Act, which could throw the whole communications sector into disarray, because if California is allowed to ignore some of the clauses and write their own rules, why shouldn't every other state localise its own telecommunications law? So that sets nasty precedent. And then secondly, if it's allowed to stand, it violates the coalition argues that it violates the Supremacy Clause and the Commerce Clause of the American Constitution. So undermining that potentially creates a constitutional crisis. So it's
a bit of a domino effect of legal constitutional fun.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, as long as you know, I personally think that net neutrality rules go too far one way and they over-regulate the industry. The telcos have to be given an opportunity to make money, otherwise that's going to impact their desire and their ability to invest in networks further down the line. But on Pi's side, I think the telcos have shown that they're not trustworthy to be self-regulating. So this Wild West internet is going too far,
right?
As well.
Fair enough.
I think the sensible decision is have something in the middle, which is more light touch regulation, but gives the telcos the opportunity to make money. But ultimately, the current position is not attainable. California cannot be allowed to keep these rules. Reform has to come from the FCC level, otherwise you completely destroy the Communications Act, or you violate one of the clauses, which undermines pretty much the whole Communications Act, and you create a constitution. You potentially violate and undermine clauses in the American Constitution, which would be equally as disastrous. Can you imagine the ripples that would go across all around the world for gun law, all across the country for gun laws, freedom of speech,
if suddenly
abortion rights, gay marriage. There's so many things that if you undermine the Constitution, it percolates everywhere.
Yeah, it's hard for us to understand in the UK because we don't have this state versus federal thing here.
And we don't
counties don't get to make their own laws.
And we don't have a written constitution, so there's a lot more grey areas.
So we get
in the
independence for Cornwall and places like that. Yeah.
Quite.
Or Scotland.
Cornish separatists.
There are Cornish separatists.
Excellent.
They have their own flag, don't they? It's black and yellow.
Cornwall has quite a strong separatist movement out of all the bits of England.
Sort of withhold pasties from the rest of the country?
They sort of regard themselves as part of the Celtic fringe, don't they?
Oh, well, they are actually. If you look at it historically, there's a sort of line of longitude which encompasses Wales and Cornwall and Brittany and obviously Ireland.
Yeah, and Galicia in
where
Spain.
we're all pretty Celtic.
Yeah.
I bet you feel a bit of an affinity towards Cornish people, don't you, Jamie?
I mean, that's where the traditional Britons went. You know, when the Romans came in, they forced the ancient Britons to the outskirts of the UK, and then when the Romans left, the Anglo-Saxons came in and sort of dominated that area. So the sort of the traditional Britons, as they were, the ancient Britons, have their heritage out in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and Cornwall.
Yeah, just like it is now, everything sort of gravitates around London. So if you want a bit of peace and quiet, just clear off west for a little bit. Okay, well, I think we come to a sort of natural, sort of randomly...
On that historical lesson.
Once we start talking about history, then it's time to...
Well, I'm a history graduate, so...
Yeah, so am
I. Next week, Pierre will explain Brittany separatists.
Oh, give a shit about France.
And how impressed he is by any part of the world that can have a city called Brest. So mature. Okay, on that immature note, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully you'll forgive me and join us for the next one.